Chapter 6. Breathe. Brynn sat on her bed, wearing an oversized sweatshirt, drying her shower-damp hair with a towel. She pulled in a long breath. I see Marietta every day. I see Elsa and Soraya all the time. It's just game night. Her pulse hammered so quickly against her neck, it buzzed her skin. Breathe. When her phone chimed for a message, she wasn't sure if it felt like a lifesaver or a bomb ticking. But when she saw Finn's name on the notification, her lips tugged into a smile. SOS, his message read. What's wrong? She typed back. She didn't even put her phone down. Sure enough, the next second her phone rang again, and then it wouldn't stop. I'm supposed to give a speech in an hour for the wedding, and I've got nothing. Her eyes peeled open, but a chuckle also flew out of her. Wasn't he working on that in class last week? Before fall break started? She typed a version of that thought back to him. His reply was quick. I tried. Nothing came out. She stared at his messages, feeling cracks in her own bones. Images from when she was a kid flashed in her mind's eye. Blank cards and notes, and the storm-dark emptiness of her head. The memories played back of her dad, stepmom's friends, family members. They were all faceless, placing pen and paper in front of her to write messages to her stepmom for her birthdays, Mother's Days, whatever. She never knew what to write. So, she'd copied messages and platitudes she'd remembered from TV and in books. That won't work for Finn, though. Pursing her lips, she scoured her head for ideas. When she thought of something, she let out something between a gasp and a quiet yelp. She typed it back quickly. Comedy, was his reply. Yeah, she typed, use all that quick wit you've got. So, you think I'm witty? Shut up, she wrote back. He sent back an emoji that made no sense to her as a response, so she just stared at it. I think I'll do that. He sent a second later. Sun-kissed warmth crept into her lips, and she fought against it as a gnawing ache bit at her ribs. Are you doing okay? Each word she typed with painstaking slowness. Each letter, every character strained the muscles in her fingers. But she sent it anyway. You worried about me. What does that mean? She thought. I just know it can be tough. The family events, she sent back. Seconds stretched out as she stared at the text thread and no 3 dots. Her stomach started to churn. And then they popped up. What do you normally do? Her fingers stiff. They tingled with a freezer burn numbness. But she reached back through her memories. I count, she typed back. When everything feels like it'll burst, I count. Anything I can think of. The number of blue shirts, the beats in a song, the times someone says, oh, anything. I just count. Distilling her thoughts into a message, she sent it to him. I'll try it, he said. Brynn, Marietta called from the living room, her voice breaching through the closed door. You coming? Yeah, she called back, but her throat was all scratchy. Clearing it, she tried again. I'll be right there. but her gaze dropped back to the phone on her crisscrossed legs. Her fingers hovered over it for a moment before she picked it up. "Good luck," she typed out, and as the swoosh of the send button echoed in the room, she patted her hair down one more time before going to join her roommates.
Finn. Everything itched. Finn's skin itched from the new suit his mother bought him. His eyes itched from all the frilly white fabric everywhere that reminded him of hospitals. His brain itched too, and there was no way to scratch that. Suddenly, he saw ants crawling across a brain. His brain. He sucked in a breath as the violent itches sent shivers down his spine that he forced himself to hold back. Closing his eyes, he saw a fiery blemish across the coastline behind his eyelids. Somehow, it quieted the creeping, crawling sensations even when he opened his eyes. There's gauze everywhere. He reached for the phone in his pocket, but clamped down on his jaw. Still, the bubbling laughter threatened to burst out as he imagined Brynn's confused face. She won't know how to respond. Before he dropped his gaze to the phone in his lap, he glanced around. His mother's eyes caught him from 2 tables away. It's like he could hear her thoughts in the set of her pursed lips, her aging skin emphasized by the deep red lipstick she wore. "Put it away." Everything itched again. He tucked the phone back in his pocket and focused on the dance floor where the maid of honor or one of Rose's other friends held a mic, and she blabbed on and on about her and the new husband. Finn's foot tapped to a non-existent beat that seemed to be pulsing from a pressure building in his chest like an overfilled balloon. The chatter filled his head, but he focused on counting the sounds instead of listening to the words. Once she was done, his mom and dad stood up, taking the floor. "Thank you, Sienna," his mom said into the mic before folding the girl in an awkward hug. Then, his dad took the mic from his mom's hands. "Yes, a big thanks to everyone for all your words of love and wisdom," his dad said, echoing from the speakers with his booming confidence, "and to our son for his humorous interlude." Eyes all around the room fell on him. He smirked, raised his eyebrows, and leaned back with ease into his chair. "Love you, Rosie," he called out, and was rewarded with a scoff from his sister a couple seats away. Glancing to her, he could feel the ghost of bruises on his arm from all the times he'd called her that over the years. On cue, she fixed him with a glare that was just light enough to elicit laughter from all the guests instead of silence. "Siblings, am I right?" his dad said, which resulted in another round of laughter from the guests. His dad's lips twitched into a smile like the showman he was. "Thank you," his dad continued as the laughter died down. "As you all know, the Whitakers have always valued the meaning of nuclear family. The idea that this is the core of your world, ours as parents, and that of our children, is what makes family truly special." The room was charged with electric silence. Finn's eyes slid around the room, taking in the rapt expressions of everyone, charmed like his dad's words were a spell. His stomach lurched. "We endeavored to raise our children with the kind of support needed to build their own families someday." Finn's vision doubled like too many drinks into a Friday night. Nausea gurgled up into his throat. He dropped his head, gaze on his lap. "So today is like seeing that goal to the finish line for our baby girl. Rose, as you embark on this new journey, we hope that you will build that same kind of support into the family you will now build." Finn's breath choked his throat. He reached to loosen his tie, but his mother's inevitable disapproving stare acted as a prison, holding his hands back. "We love you." Lifting his head felt like weightlifting with his neck, but he looked up just in time to see his dad raise his champagne glass. Finn's arms were lead, but he lifted his glass with everyone else, even his claws gripped around his throat. "Excuse me," he mumbled to the groomsmen beside him as he focused every movement around the chokehold that kept him from breathing. The world spun, but his legs carried him from the main room. He stumbled down hallways until he was gasping for air, falling against the nearest wall. "Is this it?" he thought as he slid. He only realized he was on the floor when his hand hit the carpet. When his eyes closed, all he saw was red. He gasped and finally felt air whooshing into his lungs. The next second, cool glass met his cheek, ringing echoed in his ear. "Finn?" He pulled in a deep breath. "What's up?" Brynn said against a noisy background. "Why are you calling?" "Where are you?" he said, his voice strange to his own ears. She said, "I'm at the bar." "You're working?" he asked, pulling himself up into a more seated position against the wall. She said, and he could almost imagine the question marks in her eyes. "Yeah, I made an excuse to go to the back room." Shuffling sounds created static through the line. "Do you need to go back to work?" "No," she said too quickly. Yeah. But is the wedding going all right?" "There's gauze everywhere," he whispered. "There's gauze?" she asked. She sounded alarmed. "What? Did someone get hurt?" He laughed, and it dissipated the pressure in his stomach. "No," he said through chuckles. "That's exactly what I thought you'd say." "What?" she said. "You're not making any sense." "It's nothing," he said. "Thanks for picking up, but get back to work." What the ugh," she said, blowing out a tired sigh he felt through the phone. "Fine, as long as everything's all right." "Yeah," he said. "Whatever," she said, but her voice blew the ants in his head away. "Just don't forget. About the counting, I mean." His chest tightened. "Yeah, thanks," he said as the tension in his lungs ballooned. "Bye, Finn," she said, and the phone beeped with the ended call. His hand, with the phone still gripped in his fingers, fell to the floor. The ensuing silence curled his fingers into a fist. Nails sliced his palms. Music drifted into this tiny hall where he'd collapsed. The dancing's begun. He couldn't stand, though, so he counted the beat of the bass. "Finn?" The voice paled to the one still filling his head, but he glanced to where it came from. Lana, one of Rose's high school friends. Flashes of her in his high school room pulsed like a festering wound. "What are you doing out here?" she asked, flitting down the hall until she was a few steps from him. "Are you drunk?" He laughed. "Who knows," he said, eyes locking with hers. "Maybe." His mind wandered to the main room where his sister, his parents, everyone else was. "What are you doing out here?" She dropped her gaze to the floor. Sighing, she smoothed her bridesmaid dress down and sat next to him. "I saw you leave," she said, peeking up at him from under her lashes. "So, I went looking for you." It was just like this before, when Rose'd have sleepovers with her friends and Lana snuck into his room those nights. "You looking to reminisce?" he asked, his skin humming as he stared at the curve of the dress's corset. For old time's sake, a grin shaped her lips into an invitation. He met her mouth with his, tangling his hands into her hair as he lost himself in the song and shoved away the distant beats of his sister's wedding.
Brynn. Brynn stared at her phone, reading Finn's texts again before closing her apartment's front door behind her. "Lunch tomorrow? 2 p.m.? My treat at Hendrix." As she walked her way through the maze of university streets, the late November chill nipped at her exposed skin. She sighed, crossing the campus quad to the dining hall. When she walked in, the muted chatter sent her eyes flying around the seating area. It's empty. Other than a few students and the bare-bones staff scattered around the area, most of the seating was open. Well, it is fall break. She glanced around, searching for Finn, but she seemed to have arrived before him this time. Waiting in the outer seating area, she sat on a bench, leaned against the wall, and closed her eyes. Thoughts drifting, she sighed when her siblings' earlier texts popped to mind. "That was a pretty heavy sigh," a familiar voice said. Her lids flew open, finding Finn hovering over her, his hands in the pockets of his puffy jacket. When their eyes met, a half grin lit his face. "Everything good?" he asked. Gaze dropping to the floor, she pursed her lips. Thanksgiving's in 2 days. Ah, he said, taking a seat on the bench beside her, his head tapping the wall behind them. Yeah, I'm not going this year 'cause of Rose's wedding. Normally, I stay on campus, she said. But this year, Riley asked me to come and then they reached out. Your dad? Stepmom? Both. The squeaking of the bench cushion drew her attention, and she found Finn sitting up straight, looking directly at her. So, he said, you're going then? Words died on her tongue, but she couldn't look away from him. Brynn? Well, she finally said, dropping her head to stare at the floor. Riley asked, and they all invited me, so. So, you decided to go, he said, his tone odd, but softer somehow. She glanced at him, finding a soft smile on his lips. Her own mouth tugged at the corners. Well, Finn said, with a deep breath. Shall we eat? She nodded, and they made their way through the turnstiles, once Finn scanned his student ID for the both of them. Splitting up like the last time, Brynn made her rounds through the open food stalls. But there were fewer options here, even though this hall must have been twice the size of the one where they first ate together. Once she was satisfied, she found a table, and it wasn't long before Finn dropped his tray across from her. Hey, she said, taking a sip of the drink she'd grabbed from the smoothie bar. I'd been wondering how. She cut herself off, unsure how to shape the questions that had haunted her since his call from the wedding. How? He asked, peering up at her with his face halfway to the burger in his hands. The sight pulled giggles up from deep in her chest. I'm sorry. What? He said, straightening and dropping the food back to his tray. How was the wedding? She asked, the words tumbling out. I mean, how's it been since? He stared at her with some kind of glint in his eyes that sliced through her ribs. It was, he said, picking the burger back up and taking a bite. Very on brand for the Whitakers. He took another bite, but even around the food, his expression paled. I knew something happened. Finishing off the burger, he dropped one hand on the table as his other reached for his drink. Glancing at his hand, a memory flashed through her head of her mother taking her hand and holding it tight when she'd had a rough day.
Finn nearly choked on the soda sliding down his throat as the shock tore through him. Brynn, who'd flinched when he tapped her shoulder just a few weeks ago, was holding his hand. His gaze flew to her, but she was staring at their hands. It sounds like it wasn't easy, she said as her cheeks slowly burned roses. Yeah, he said, but it sounded strangled. I should have expected it. I get it, she said in a low voice. Yeah, he said, his hand wrapping around hers. Her eyes flew to his. Yeah, she said, slipping her hand back into her lap as she glanced out the window. His fingers buzzed where their skin had touched. You want to hang out after? He asked, his gaze caught in the curve of her neck. On Thursday. Oh, she said, turning back to him. I can't. I'm staying overnight because the buses don't run late enough. He pursed his lips. No helping it, huh? He said. I'll be back on Friday, she said, her voice barely carrying. And then I'll go to that spot. That spot? She met his eyes, but her gaze was far away like that first time he saw her. You mean those steps where I found you? She barely moved, but something in her look shifted, like she was actually looking at him again. A spark lit just below his gut. "Yeah, we can meet there," she said, "if you want." The words were shaky, but he heard them. "Sure," he said. "Sounds good." She smiled. Just a twitch at the corner of her mouth, but he grinned back. Once they finished their meals and parted ways, Finn's head was filled with flashes of Brynn, her hand around his, the blush staining her cheeks all the way up to her ears, that look in her eyes, the curve of her neck. He shook his head, trying to drive it all out, but the images wouldn't budge, and his skin started to buzz again all the way into his extremities. As the discomfort grew, he pulled his phone out and sent a text. 3 hours later, Finn lay in his bed, the sheets still clumped from hooking up with Mara. He glanced at the bathroom door where she was in the shower now. Closing his eyes, filled his head with replays of what just happened on his bed, but it only left him with a chill in his chest. "I wonder what Brynn's doing." Pulling his phone from the nightstand, he started texting her. "How long has it been now since I met Brynn? A month? 2 months?" As they texted, the cold room gradually warmed before the click of the bathroom door interrupted their silent conversation. Mara emerged from the bathroom, steam swirling around the curve of her bare waist. But Finn's focus lingered at the cleavage spilling out of her bra. As she stepped into the living area, she secured her last earring before her eyes swept the room. "Fuck," she said. "I can't find my shirt or my thong." Finn's eyes dropped to her hips and the skirt that cut off at her upper thigh. "Ah," she said, and Finn's gaze lingered at the hem of the skirt as she bent over to snatch the missing shirt. "So," Finn said, "you've got nothing on under that skirt?" Her head whipped around, locking his eyes in her sniper sights. "Down, boy," she said, but the smirk that wove into her lips was inviting. "I just finished showering." Shirt in hand, she sauntered over to the bed, taking a seat beside him. Her eyes piercing his, she placed a finger on his bare chest. "If you're still feeling," she started, her finger tracing the contours of his abs. "Frustrated tomorrow, give me a call." Her gaze punctured him and sent blood rushing to his lower body as she withdrew her finger and rose from the bed. "See ya," she said. And it wasn't long before he heard the door close when Brynn's face popped into his head. He picked up his phone, starting up their conversation again.